Hello and welcome. I'm Charles Jacobs, President of Americans for Peace and Tolerance. You are all muted, but you can use the Q&A button on your screen to ask questions, and I will try very hard to get all of them answered or addressed before we're done. I think it behooves us to tell you that there's great news today in the world that the UAE and Israel have decided to have diplomatic relationships. And this is a groundbreaking development, but we should all be celebrating. It's an amazing thing. The UAE and Israel have decided to have diplomatic relations. So, to our topic today, the Jewish community is under siege. Every Jewish building and institution in America needs security. And it seems like there's a perfect storm gathered against us. Jews are assaulted ideologically from four sets of enemies: the leftist anti-Zionists, the right, the alt-right, the Islamists, and perhaps most painfully, the Black anti-Semites led by Farrakhan and the Black Hebrews. Jews are being physically assaulted, mostly by these groups, as you can see on YouTube weekly, if not daily. So where is the Black community? Where are our friends among the Black leaders we know and have allied with? Today, we're honored to have with us Joshua Washington, a young, brave, eloquent, determined Black leader who fights on our side. Many of you may know Josh's father, Pastor Dumisani Washington, who's a senior associate of CUFI, Christians United for Israel, an eminent public speaker, and the founder of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. And many of you will soon come to know Josh's wife, who has promised to do a session with us in the near future, Olga, who is an attorney from South Africa. And she is the founder of Defend, Embrace, Invest, Support Israel, DAISY. And she did a video on PragerU that got over 1 million views. She's amazing as well. Joshua Washington is now the director of his father's Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Like his father, Dumisani, Josh is an accomplished musician. He brings his pro-Israel religious message into music, and he performs as part of a group called the Hebrew Project. So let me start off welcoming you, Josh, and let's see if we can help our audience get to know you a bit up close and personal. So, Joshua Washington, how in the world is it that you came to be fighting for the Jewish people?
Well, Charles, first of all, thank you so much for having me here on this program. And for me and my sisters, we were raised to always, we're Christians. We were raised to always have this appreciation for the Hebrew roots of our faith. So we've always, my father and my mother did a great job just helping us to make that connection, to really see that if it wasn't for the Jewish people, there wouldn't be a Christian faith. And even in our family, we would always have connections to the Jewish people in our communities. We would go to whether it's celebrating the feasts, Pesach or Hanukkah, or even observing Shabbat. And so that's something that we've always done. So growing up, that's been a part of my household. And then coming to college was really when I was faced with kind of like modern day Israel, Middle East kind of things. I went to college for music, and my college wasn't really political in terms of, like, it wasn't hostile toward Israel, but there was little subtle things that would happen. There were these fundraisers for Gaza, during one of the Gaza wars, and their posters talking about how Israel was mistreating the Gazans and about the Palestinians there. And I just remember it just not sitting right with me, and asking my dad questions, and then eventually reading books and reading articles. And so from then until about 5-6 years later, me studying, researching, talking to people, making friends in Israel. My dad had started IBSI at a certain point, and then I was really just getting the information and talking with him as well, until I got to a point where I felt like I had to speak up. And once we discovered the Black civil rights movement that was pro-Israel in the 60s, that I'm sure we'll talk about later, that's really what kind of made me feel like I had a responsibility to speak against the lies, and to speak up for the Jewish people and the state of Israel. So that's what made me. That's what kind of brought me here now. And yeah, it's been a journey, you know.
So it's really interesting for Jewish people to hear a Christian say the words that, well, we believe that if it weren't for the Jews and Judaism, there'd be no Christianity.
Absolutely.
Is that does that belong to a certain strand of Christianity? Does it belong to a sect? Does it belong to
You know, what I found, Charles, is that it really is it's an individual revelation. I've met Christians from all different kinds of denominations who have come to that realization on their own, who've realized, you know what, maybe we should be studying the Bible from the Jewish, culture and perspective and mindset, because it was, most of the Bible was written in Hebrew, and but it's not really and the church that that my dad pastors and everything, we're not denominational, but other yeah, I found that it really does. It's on an individual level. There are people within each denomination that have come to that realization. Whether their church actually teaches that or not, it really, depends. But yeah, that's what I found. It's more of like this, almost like an awakening of this realization.
so, when I grew up, long time ago,
Mhm.
blacks and Jews were a thing. We were a hot thing.
Yeah.
We were dating. We were married,
Mm.
connected at the hip. I went to school with black and white kids, and the Jewish and the black kids hung together against the racist kids. I went
Right.
to
Right.
college. Along with some other Jewish kids, we joined the NAACP chapter at my college in Rutgers, Newark. Um,
Mm.
we all went to the "I Have a Dream" speech, Martin Luther King's March on Washington. We all
Mm.
cried. We all linked arms.
Mm.
We know the history of how Jews helped
Mm.
blacks during this time. Um,
Mm.
there's a wonderful new film called Shared Legacies, which I'm going to talk about later, that documents this in a
Mm.
wonderful way, and that blacks
Mm.
and Jews are viewing around the country together. So all of a sudden, we find ourselves with a large and growing part of the black community extremely hostile to Jews and Judaism in Israel.
Mm.
How did you, in your view, how did this come
Mm.
about?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a few factors that really brought this about. One of them is the intentional targeting of the Black community to kind of take on this Palestinian narrative. And there's been this attempt to hijack our story and our narrative to fit the anti-Israel agenda. And I think that's to do with what was going on our side, especially in the 60s, was that there were more and more radicals that were getting really impatient with Dr. King and didn't really agree with his nonviolent philosophy. They saw it more as a political tactic, but they believed in violence and force, and they were also wanting to have this global connection to global struggles. There was more of a, we need to right the wrongs of the whole world. And so one of the more weightier civil rights organizations, called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was one of those committees that the younger members were more and more radical, and there's a lot of tension within the group. And once they voted out the current president and voted in another one, and had different leadership, they began to kind of don this anti-Israel mantra, in large part because there were some in the leadership who were already friends with people in the Nation of Islam, and there are people who are already friends with different Palestinian students who are anti-Israel. The radicals saw Israel as this white colonizing people that came and took the land, and they saw the Palestinians as these darker, oppressed people who Israel oppressed. And so it was easy to kind of frame it that way for them. And once it was framed that way, you had a lot of people who had a lot of weight in the community who were siding with the Palestinians and against Israel, and not just Israel, but then the Jewish community in their area, because then they not only did they don this anti-Israel agenda, but they also perpetuated these anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes. I mean, it very quickly devolved into the Jews, are the puppet masters of the world kind of thing. It really went into that pretty quickly.
So, so
And
I,
that was the rift. Even in the Black community, it became a rift.
what I'm hearing is that the new anti-Semitism uh, and the old anti-Semitism have melded in the anti-Semitic part of the Black community. So the new anti-Semitism
Absolutely.
was the Palestinians are like blacks, the Jews are like whites. We stole their land, they're darker skinned. When actually all this is not the case.
Right.
In fact, half of Israel came from the Middle East and is in many cases darker skinned than the Palestinians, who are in many cases much lighter skinned. So the skin color business is an easy way to line up against us, but it's not even a true thing. And then the oppression and all of that. And you're saying that melded in with the older tropes of the Jews, the secret demon behind the scenes, masterminds who control the whole world through banking and media and Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a pot of poison. I mean, together, this is a pot of poison, and that's what's bubbling up there.
Absolutely.
So, you, the deeply Christian part of the Black community, or a big part of it, is less vulnerable to this than the non-Christian part. And of course, the older generation, which has more of a history and a personal history with Jewish people allying politically and being friends, than does your generation. So I imagine, tell us about the younger generation and what's happening.
Yeah, so there is a vacuum of education in the younger generation. I mean, and you said it absolutely right. I mean, part of what has kept me from getting sucked into that is not just the fact that I am a Christian, but that my parents really, taught us the scriptures. We know what the Bible says about the Jewish people, about the Jewish diaspora, about the return of the Jewish people, and all those things. And also just the fact that I had two parents who were invested in me. I told my wife this a couple weeks ago. The older I get, the more I realize that if I didn't have my father in my life, I actually probably most likely would have gotten swept up in and all the other stuff that was going on college campuses. I may actually have been an anti-Israel, activist, because there's this need to want to, right the wrongs and speak truth. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, quote unquote resources out there to really kind of equip these young people. And so that vacuum has been filled by people like Louis Farrakhan, by people in the Nation of Islam, by people in the Black Hebrew Israelites, especially because they actually they cherry pick verses that many of us have never seen before because we don't really read our scriptures, and then they attribute it to something that doesn't even make sense if you actually read the full context of the scriptures. And a lot of Black people, including pastors and ministers, are falling into it because it's just the scriptures that we should have been reading but aren't reading. And that's why we're seeing more and more, especially in my generation, because we're a lot less biblically literate than our parents and our grandparents. There's a hole that's there, and it's being filled with all kinds of nonsense. So one of the reasons why IBSI exists is to proactively fill that vacuum with the truth, the right education, and kind of dispel some of those lies and stuff.
So let me talk a little bit about Christian love of Israel, Christian support of Israel. that it took us, people like myself, 15 years to preach to the Jewish community. Guess what? It's a new day. The Christians are our friends. And this was not an
Mm,
easy pitch to make because of our history together. And I would
right,
go in
right,
front of synagogues full of Holocaust survivors and tell them that, hey, guess what? Christians are our friends. And I would be, looked at askance, to say the least.
right,
But
right.
15 years on, and with all of the things that the Christian community in America has done for Israel, even Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of England has even said that the Christian support for Israel is a modern miracle, like Hanukkah.
Mm,
So
right, right.
now the Jews are kind of getting it. You can
Mm-hmm,
understand why
mm-hmm,
there was suspicion. You can understand also
right.
one of the suspicions is that, well, they're being nice to us because in their eschatological views, in their end of times views, they think that if the Jews go to a safe Israel, that will mark the end of time and then Jesus will come in the second coming. So that's why they're doing it. So how would you, as a religious Christian, explain to Jews? I mean, why would you support Jews if not for or apart from the hope that we're going to bring on the second coming by going to Israel?
Right. Well, the biggest one is that it is a mandate, and the scriptures do talk about. It goes back to Genesis when God tells Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And as a Christian, we take that very literally. Is even in the New Testament, there are stories about Gentiles who had favor with the Jewish community because they were charitable, because they were nice to Jewish people, they defended the Jewish people, and that there's a story in Acts about an Italian man. I mean, a Greek man who needed something from one of the disciples, and the reason why he was able to get access was because he had favor with the Jewish community, and because he blessed the Jewish community. And so for us as Christians, we know that it is our mandate to stand with Israel, not because we'll hasten the second coming or things like that, but just because that's what God said, and that's what He promised to Abraham. And so, yeah, as a Christian, and also when we see that, as Christians, this is why the whole racial thing is so dangerous, is because it flies in the face of what Scripture says, about how the Jews have been scattered all around the earth, and how God promised that He would return them to Israel. And that's exactly, I mean, no other country has that story. No other country has that, can say that, we've been scattered like this for generations, and then we were able to come back and rebuild our country. I mean, that's something that's just incredible. So as a Christian, we see and we recognize that no, that is what God said He was going to do, and our job is to stand with them, and to defend, and to do our best to let the truth come out and speak against the lies and the all the libels that are told about Israel and the Jewish people. So yeah.
So I have to tell you that given the situation that we're in, where my synagogue has guards and all the Jewish schools have guards. I mean, to hear you say that is just feels so good to us, and it's
Mhm.
just God bless you. So I want to ask you about how a little bit about the sources of the anti-Semitism in the Black community. I want to ask you about the Black
Yeah,
Hebrews. I want to ask you about Louis Farrakhan, and I
absolutely.
want to ask you about Black Lives Matter. So most people in the Jewish community had never heard of the Black Hebrews, and all of a sudden they're kind of almost front and center,
Right.
shooting at us,
Mm-hmm.
claiming that we're
Yeah.
imposters, a line that Farrakhan has picked up a lot,
Yeah.
that we're not really the Jews, but they
Yeah.
are. So who are they, and
Yep.
what's their message?
Yeah. So just as a little commercial, my dad does pretty regularly now teaching called What You Need to Know About the Black Hebrew Israelites. He does that through Christians United for Israel. There's a couple of different of them. You know, there is one that they are actually Black Jews, and there's really not that sort of tension that's there with their beliefs. And there's another group of African Americans primarily, who this is where we're getting all of this rhetoric from about Black Jews, African Americans being the real Jews, and lighter colored Jews being fake, and all those things. And they'll take scriptures straight out of, they'll take little pieces of scripture like out of Deuteronomy that speak to the Jews going back to Egypt as slaves and ships, and they say, see, this represents the transatlantic slave trade, and therefore Black Jews are real. And what again, what the problem with that is that they're just taking scriptures out of context, because there's a lot of scriptures that actually speak to Assyria and Egypt and Ethiopia and the four corners of the earth. So but they really, they've kind of been making these big inroads over the past few years, and especially in churches. I mean, they straight up have been going into churches and challenging the pastors, and actually swaying members and even swaying some pastors with this this theology that the reason why Black people have been oppressed in history is because we're the real Jewish people, and the ones who are white are the fake ones. They're imposters. And they kind of just rely on ignorance of scripture, because really their claims can be refuted so easily using the same Bible that they're using. But unfortunately, because a lot of people don't really know the scriptures as well, they don't know how to combat those things.
So actually, they're saying they're the real Jews, and they've been oppressed because they're the real Jews, because Jews are oppressed.
Yep.
And so we're trying to compete with them. We want more oppression, so we want to be the Jews to be more oppressed. It doesn't seem to make any sense. So who are we?
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Who are we?
You in their eyes are, they say, Khazars, or you guys are, and they have this whole, fake history, which was debunked. I mean, there are archaeologists that spent years just trying, because I read that it actually takes more work to prove that something didn't happen than to prove that it did happen.
Right.
So it took years for these archaeologists to prove that no, Jews they're not Khazars, they didn't come from this place. And then when it comes to like things like the Holocaust, they'll there's this convoluted, there's this fake quote that was passed around for a couple weeks from Hitler, saying that the reason why Hitler was killing the European Jews was because, and this is the part that always loses me, he knew that the real Jews were in the U.S. and that the U.S. stole them, and so his whole thing is to kind of bring that to light, which doesn't really explain at all his rhetoric or his actions against the Jews of Europe. It doesn't really touch on any of that. But people, including celebrities and other people influence, were sharing this quote as if it were a real thing said, and it was pretty mind-boggling. It was disheartening to see, especially people with thousands, sometimes millions of followers. But the Black Hebrew Israelites, they see you guys as not real Jews, and because of that, and the other thing is that you guys, this is their thinking anyway, are the main, you control the transatlantic slave trade. So not only are we oppressed because we're the real Jews, but the fake Jews, quote unquote, were oppressing us. And so that's kind of where they're coming from with that. And obviously, again, not only is that not true, there's so much evidence for Jews that fought against the slave trade. There's so much evidence of Jews that actually fought and died with us so that we could have rights. That way outweighs. I mean, there were a handful of Jews that owned slaves, but to say that as a conspiracy, the Jewish people owned us.
Okay, we'll get to that when we get to Farrakhan, because that's
way out of whack.
Yeah, we'll get to the slave thing when we get to Farrakhan.
Absolutely.
But, so I'm having a real hard time that these Black people who want to say they're the Jews are looking at us
Yeah.
What would be our motive? I mean, if the whole thing about being Jews is being oppressed, why would we want? And anyway, nothing makes sense. And this goes to show you, people can believe anything. I mean,
Absolutely.
people can believe anything, and it's extraordinarily dangerous, and it's
They
a new
really
thing. And
can.
I don't know that there's enough work done in the Jewish community to understand and confront this or to deal with it in some way. So whatever your
Right.
father is doing, I mean, please do send us those tapes and speeches,
Absolutely.
and we will send them around the Jewish community for sure.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Louis Farrakhan, I think, is the most dangerous anti-Semite in the country. I know that people say, well, the neo-Nazis actually shoot you more. Maybe they do at this point, but the best the Nazis did in Charlottesville, they were going to have this huge thing. They had like less than 100 people. That's the best they
Mm-hmm.
could do.
Mm-hmm.
Farrakhan speaks to hundreds, thousands and thousands of people.
Absolutely.
You can go up to a Nazi if you're a tough guy and punch him in the mouth, and that's the end of his speech. You
Right.
can't do that to Louis Farrakhan. No one's going to go
Mm-mm.
up to Louis Farrakhan and punch him in the mouth, and that'll
Right.
be the end of his speech. Uh,
Right. Right.
and Farrakhan, as you said, Farrakhan's first major assault on the Jews that I think had any kind of traction was to say that we were the slavers. The Jews were the master slavers. He wrote a book,
Yep.
The secret relationship between
Secret
blacks and
relationship.
Jews, which what he did was he found out that those few Jews, mostly in Curacao, did own slaves. Now, everybody owned slaves. Every culture in the world owned slaves. Blacks owned
Mm-hmm.
slaves, Muslims owned slaves, Christians owned slaves, Africans owned slaves. So the only question is not who owned slaves, but who got rid of it
Mm-hmm.
and who fought for
Right. Right.
emancipation.
Right.
And then, of course, what he did was, it was a very powerful book because he was able to do something that I call the zoom lens effect. Here's this entire beach of sand all over the beach of slavery. And he picks up this one handful, which is the Jewish participation in it, shameful but tiny. And
Mm-hmm.
he goes point by point. Samuel Cohn, here's a document. Samuel Cohn bought Millie for $12 when she was 16.
Right.
So if you read that, you're going to be hateful to those.
Yeah.
I was hateful to whoever did anything like that.
Right. Right.
But it's an entire convoluted and involuted presentation because the Jews were a tiny, tiny fraction of it.
Yep.
And in fact, his friends, the Arabs and the Muslims, have always done it, have done it more than white slave trade, and continue to do it.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about how to think about that. But,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But tell us about what's Farrakhan's power in the Black community aside from cursing the Jews?
Yeah. So, and this is, I think, the most important part of understanding his hold in the Black community is that Louis Farrakhan, and first of all, to your first point, you're absolutely right. He's way more dangerous because he's more accepted in our culture. A lot of influencers look to him: Tamika Mallory, Mark Lamont Hill, rappers, singers, athletes,
Yeah.
artists. And what the thing is, I actually came across some of his old speeches, like in the late 80s, early 90s, and clips of some of his old speeches. And he, outside of his Jew hatred, Farrakhan, there were things that he preached that actually were beneficial to the Black community, especially when he was younger. He talked about, there was one speech, his sermon was about not blaming other people for your own shortcomings. And the whole thing was about stop blaming the white man for things that you could do yourself. And, things like that. And talking about what love is and how we need that. And if we don't have that, then we're nothing as a people. And I think that one of the things, and not only that, but he actually has gone into some of the very dangerous and very impoverished parts of the Black community, and actually worked in there to help rid the community of drugs and help people get back on their feet and all those things. And part of the reason why a lot of the Black community really does look up to him is that he has acted as something of a father figure to a lot of these people. helping them kind of find their way. The unfortunate part of that is that he's a raging anti-Semite. And so for some people, they'll either just ignore that and not touch it, or because they look up to him, they will actually subscribe to those teachings. And we're seeing the fruits of that right now. People, like I said, it's not the majority of Black people who are doing this, but it is becoming more and more mainstream, where Black people who are very, very, very influential, very culturally relevant, are sharing these things from Farrakhan. He's filled that vacuum of education, and he's done it pretty successfully. And he's also put a lot of poison in there as well. So yeah, that's I think, to me, that's one of the biggest ways to describe how he has that sort of a tie on the Black community. And it's because he's done other things that have actually helped, in some way, especially in his younger years. So that, and then that kind of also, I think, helps understand where the Black community is, because it's not just like we're just out there trying to figure out how to hate Jewish people. Is that a lot of Black people, they've looked to him, the way I look to my father, often, some of these people. And so then when I think about it like that and go, okay, well, if my father started going on this kind of tirade against a group of people, and if I was young enough, I'm not going to publicly, denounce him. I may just ignore him, or depending on, where I was, I might just, start listening to him and agreeing with him on some of that stuff, just because of what he's already done in my life. And so that's where that tie comes in, and we're trying to separate those things,
So,
Yeah.
so you'll forgive me if I do a little commercial of my own here.
Sure.
So you and I have talked about this, and I believe that the way to undermine Farrakhan and expose him in the Black community is to point out that he stands in the way of the emancipation of the slaves, the Black slaves in 5 African countries today. And we fought him on this 15 years ago when he denied. We went into Sudan to help liberate slaves, along with Christian Solidarity International. And Farrakhan was embarrassed by the reports that Arabs and Muslims have Black slaves. Why? Because his main mission is to persuade Blacks in America that Islam is the path to their own liberation. And reports that Muslims are enslaving Blacks in Africa would upend that, would really harm that message. And he was really upset. And we duked it out, and we have films of him saying it's not true, it's not true. And there was one famous case where at a press conference, a reporter said, "Well, why aren't you agreeing? Everybody knows. I mean, even Amnesty International says Arabs have Black slaves in Sudan." And he got very angry, and he went like this. You can see it on the film. "If you think there are slaves in Sudan, go find it for yourself and come back." Well, 2 reporters from the Baltimore Sun went to Sudan with us. They purchased the freedom of some slaves, and they wrote a 5-part series in the Baltimore Sun, which got him nominated for a Pulitzer. And he ran away from that fight after that. He no longer challenged us. Now, 15, 20 years later, there are Black slaves in Sudan, Mauritania, Nigeria, Libya, and Algeria. CNN has a small clip of a Black man being sold like a goat at an auction for $400. And if there were going to be an effort to free the slaves, Farrakhan would be the one standing in the way. If Farrakhan, actually, put it the other way, if Louis Farrakhan made one speech to the Black community and he said, "Hey, we have to free the slaves that history left behind. And I don't care if they're Muslims or Arabs who own them, they're Black slaves. And I put my race ahead of my whatever other political interests I have." And he actually told that to leaders of South Sudan at one point that he would, but he betrayed them. So it's my view that if that news were to spread in the Black community, and there also, it had to be joined with an effort to actually free the slaves, he'd have a difficult time. Anyway, that was my commercial for that. You and I can continue to talk about that. And I
Absolutely.
know you do
Absolutely.
use this as part of what you say when you address people. Is that
Yeah.
right?
So this teaching is one of the kind of periphery things that IBSI does to educate, because it is important, and it's attached to what's happening now, because we recognize that at IBSI, it's not enough just to, like, for instance, the film you mentioned earlier, powerful film, and I'm excited to watch it. I know that for my generation, it's attacking really, it's not enough just to show them, how blacks and Jews, were tight, especially in the 60s and 70s, but we have to go and attack the lies. Who's lying to you? Who is it that's behind all this? And then not only break down those lies, but then flip it around and say, not only is that not true, but the same people who are accusing Israel of this are actually doing it themselves. The Arab countries, like you mentioned, Nigeria, Libya, Sudan, Mauritania, and Algeria, they actually own slaves, and they've been owning them for centuries. And again, why won't Farrakhan say anything about it? And actually getting them to see what the real problem is. Because yeah, so in IBSI, we have that as one of our periphery things, because we know that if we just teach the Israel part, there's a lot of questions that are still there that we need to address. And so your writings and the things that you've done have been a big resource for us, in that, and I really been really helpful.
I would say that that film about the blacks and Jews shared legacies. Some people would say, well, that's step one. We have to get to the black kids and show them stuff they didn't know. And then step two is going to be, well, why are we hearing these lies? So anyway, whatever it is, I
Hmm.
think I'm going to hook you up with those folks. Um, Black Lives
Absolutely.
Matter. Now, it seems to me somebody hit a gold mine here, because the phrase Black Lives Matter is a winner, right? Who would ever want to live in a country where Black lives didn't matter, right?
Right.
And then when you saw the
Right.
guy leaning on his George Floyd's neck, everybody who's a decent person wanted to throw up or throw a punch. So
Absolutely.
now
Absolutely.
that's fine. That's fine.
Mm.
But
Mm.
from what I hear and what our research shows, that the people who are actually in charge of the movement and who have created the Black Lives Matter organization are have a very different agenda. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. So, and I just wrote about this in my last article too. So, you know, the founder of the Movement for Black Lives, and the founder of the Black Lives Matter organization, and the originator of the slogan are all the same person, the same people, I should say. They're three women. Patrice Cullors is the one who came up with the slogan, I believe. And the problem is that, and like you said, is that of course Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's obvious, and um, that part of what the difficulty is in coming against Black Lives Matter, because of some of their platforms, is that some people interpret it as, okay, well, you don't think that Black Lives Matter then, which is absolutely not true. Black Lives Mattered before the organization Black Lives Matter came, and so the problem with it is, and I said this in my article too, is that there's this debate going on, primarily between people who aren't in Black Lives Matter, Jewish people, other Black people, who are trying to separate the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, saying that they're two different things. Black Lives Matter doesn't share, movement for Black Lives views on Israel and Jewish people, but that's not true. I mean, Black Lives Matter has had many, and yeah, they're decentralized, but they've had many different demonstrations that came against Israel in D.C., in Portland, different parts of California, in Atlanta, in Minneapolis, in North Carolina, and one of Black Lives Matter's agenda right now is as you've been seeing the slogan, defund the police, and the thing that anti-Israel activists are trying to tie to this is, and they're doing it pretty successfully, is they're tying police brutality to the fact that there are some police departments that train in Israel, um, and so they go that far to say that Israel is the cause of police brutality in the U.S. And so obviously, well, some of the problems with that is that Israel doesn't train police officers in domestic disputes, It's all counterterrorism training. They're showing their technology and all those things. But then the other thing is, police brutality has been a thing since before we've worked with Israel. And then Israel also we also work with other countries. I mean, it's just singling out the Jewish state with these lies. And there are these other groups they're not Black Lives Matter, but they're either sponsored by, or they have a lot of representatives from Black Lives Matter there. These other organizations that have these groups that are attempting to cut ties between the police departments and Israel. And they've done successfully in a couple of different cities already, Minneapolis and Durham, North Carolina already. And so this is the agenda of Black Lives Matter. And the more that they tie police brutality to Israel, the more it's going to be the agenda for all of the different chapters across the U.S. Because why wouldn't it be? If you're at this point, right, the way they see it is, if you say you're standing for justice and for Black people, then you have to stand against the state of Israel because they're the cause of it. Right. And they don't hide this, by the way. This isn't a secret thing. They're very proud to say that we're connected. I mean, the whole concept of intersectionality is that we're all connected and our struggles are all connected, and so they're proud to say that they stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. And they're proud to say that the Black Lives Matter UK is connected to them in their struggle against colonialism. And they're proud to say that kind of stuff. Right. So that's the big issue that we have right now.
Wow. Terrible, because the Jews want to support Black civil rights, and they want to, protest against incidences where policemen have been racist, and
absolutely.
So the Jews are kind of stuck. I mean, my liberal Jewish friends are tearing their hair out. How can we do what we're supposed to do to protect Black lives, and yet not, help a group that's hurting us and is lying about us? So it's difficult. I have two more questions, and then we're going to go to the group. There's like 10 or 12 questions.
Sure.
How can we help you, Josh? Are you a 501c3?
We are. IBSI is close. So we just relocated to the East Coast. And so we're working on getting our status on this side. And so the best way right now that anyone can help IBSI is just by joining our mailing list, which if you go to, and I can put it in the chats for people who are watching, but it's IBSI, so IBSI.
IBSI?
IBSI-now.org.
Okay.
And then / contact, or you can just click on the contact button on the email, on the website, and join our mailing list, because as soon as we get that status, I'll be letting everyone know, and then you'll be able to donate to IBSI. We're taking on some pretty big ventures in these next couple of years. Actually, there's some big things we're doing, and we're going to be fundraising for it and all that stuff. So in the same vein of education. So that's the
okay. So I'm going to tell everybody on this line, and I'm going to tell everybody who we blast out to get the news out about Joshua Washington and his group. So we'll do a special email blast to get everybody signed up, as many as we can. Okay.
Sure.
The other thing is, can you send me that article that you just wrote? I think I saw it. Send it to me again, and I'll put that in the blast so people can understand your analysis of Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely. I definitely will.
So here are, so a lot of questions about Black Lives Matter. Is it in their platform? That was the question. They have some inflammatory statements that were removed. What about that claim that they removed those statements?
So they haven't actually removed it, and this is, I don't know if this is intentional, but if you go, and if you're talking about the platform, if you're talking about the Movement for Black Lives website that had their whole charter about Israel, they haven't removed it. It's just buried a little bit. So if you go on the website, you click on there, I think it's called Policy Platforms, and then you click on Invest, Divest, and then you click on Cut Military Expenditures Brief. When you click on that, it automatically downloads a PDF, and then you open that, and it has all this stuff about Israel and other countries, but it calls Israel genocidal, apartheid, all the things that we're trying to fight against.
I got to tell you, if Israel were genocidal, given the growth of the Palestinian population in Israel, they're the worst genociders ever to have lived. They're the most incompetent genociders ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is not a question for you, but why do more Christians support Israel than American Jews? And that's because American Jews are neurotic and they're falling off the train, off the truck, and they want to assimilate. And Ken Levin, Andrea Levin's husband, wrote a great book about the Oslo syndrome. We are people under siege, and when we're a people under siege acts a certain way. And one of the ways is to run away, to hide, to say I'm not bad, it's the other guy, et cetera, et cetera. It's a terrible disease that we have. It's not. Okay. How can we promote more Jews, switch the Republican Party? Well, we're a 501c3. We can't do that, and everybody can do what they want. Mr. Jacobs, the Black Hebrew Israelites have been in Israel, particularly in Dimona, since the 60s. I do know that, but we haven't paid attention, and they've been kind of quiet, at least here. I saw them, so I know. Are there, this is for you, are there any additional African-American pro-Israel leaders? Who are they?
So, there are a select few. I mean, so let me answer it this way. So there, not that I found so far, there's no organization like IBSI where it's a Black American Zionist organization, unabashedly pro-Israel. There have been attempts to have these alliances or these, coalitions, and a lot of them have usually turned out to in name only, because one of the biggest ways that I know that is because where are they? Where are their voices right now with all this stuff that's going on? And so yeah, I mean there are individuals, and at IBSI we're trying to identify those and actually kind of give them more tools and everything. But yeah, this is not a big widespread thing. There are a lot of people who like Israel, who love the Jewish people, but aren't speaking out on what's going on. Maybe they feel like they don't have enough resources to do that. Maybe they're just overwhelmed with all of the sentiment that's going on right now. But yeah, I mean, vocally, not very many right now.
Yeah. I have to say, I blame the failure. It's a lot of it has to do with the failure of Jewish leadership as well, because our leaders haven't really come up with strategies and PR that answers and goes on the offense about this defamation against us. And if we did, that would help. Why don't Black ministers speak about Black slaves in Africa?
Well, I think two reasons. I think one, they're not aware, and that's a pretty big reason. They may not be aware of it. And then the second one, honestly, is that the ones that are aware, because it doesn't fill seats. It's not something, and this is the problem that's in the Christian community right now, especially the Black Christian community, is that we are largely, I shouldn't say largely, but a lot of us are biblically illiterate, and so we, for a lot of Christians, church is more of like this kind of, more of a cultural thing that you do, and the message is more centered on other personal things and not so much what's happening and how the Bible actually speaks to what's going on in the world. And so yeah, it's like this kind of apathy, or we don't know, we don't care. And if a preacher started preaching about it, a lot of people maybe wouldn't show up next week, to church. I mean, that's
I have news for you.
When
we did this 15, 20 years ago, we had some very large Black churches join us, and some very powerful pastors. This guy, Chuck Singleton in Los Angeles, he had a church which was 3,000 people. I actually spoke there on a Sunday. My debut as a Black preacher about the Black slaves, and a lot of people were interested. So if it's in the news and then there's pictures of it, and we have 2 escaped slaves who work with us, and if they say it instead of this nice Jewish guy, I think it could change a lot of things.
Absolutely.
How can we educate young Blacks about all the truths that we're speaking about? Well, we need to invest, and we need to invest in people like Josh and his wife and his father and others. We must get to the Jewish children as well. Oh, you're not kidding. Our own situation, you think your situation is bad. Our own situation is that we've lost an awful lot of American Jews to assimilation, to non-religion, to secularism, and to those who, they march under the banner of Tikkun Olam, which is they think that Judaism is socialism. I call them Tikkunistas. So you're right about that. We do need to get to our children, and it's the failure of the Jewish leadership that we haven't. This is a terrific interview. We need to get a lot of people to see it. This has come from my friend in Detroit. Eugene, I promise you that we are going to blast this all over the universe, and everybody should re-blast it all over their universes. Josh's article is going to be sent to, where was it published, Josh, your article?
It's in the Times of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called Black Lives Matter's Jewish Problem.
Okay. All right. I think that's it. Hold on. Any other things? Okay. So listen, this is the partnership, you and me, us, my group, your group.
Absolutely.
We're going to work this forever and always, because we have big, organized, funded, determined, rabid enemies. And we have to stand up for what God said and what's right and what's true. And I want to, from all the people who are listening to this, who are my guys, and all the Jewish people in America who care about truth and justice and Jewish well-being, I really want to bless you and thank you for everything that you're doing. And next time you come with your wife.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. And I will. She's looking forward to it. I am too. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and goodbye.